Change. During our careers, we are constantly exposed to change. When treating patients, things can change from minute to minute. In the wider context of healthcare delivery, things change all the time. Tropophobia is the fear of change. I do not fear change, but I hate being told to change without being consulted or my thoughts taken into consideration or a sensible explanation given why change is required. The word change has become unfashionable in health. It's been replaced by words like integration, regionalization, transformation, and new models of care. The In Good Hands document saw the light in 2009 and brought with it the promise of new era of clinical engagement and decision-making and change. You're right. I agree with Nido Qubein, a businessman and motivational speaker, that change brings opportunity. And as ASMS members, you have the opportunity to bring around change, and your participation and ideas today and tomorrow is essential for that. As you are aware, the ASMS finds itself in an unusual situation of having 3 years between two MECA negotiations. This has given us the opportunity to shift our emphasis and concentrate on more or on some of the other aspects and functions of the organization other than MECA negotiations. I want to look at some of the changes that's actually occurred over the last 2 to 3 years and also highlight the changes that might be required for the future. Lao Tzu said, if you do not change direction, you may end up where you're heading. We also know if you're actually heading in the wrong direction, the last thing you need is to make progress. Over the next 2 days, we actually need you to give us an indication of whether you are happy and support the direction that we are heading into. As an organization, we're going from strength to strength. Our membership numbers, sorry for these guys on this side. Our membership numbers have been steadily climbing over the years, and the past 3 years has been no exception. However, our rate of growth has actually slowed down quite noticeably. And we believe at the moment that the association is growing close to the saturation point and gaining members. And that is largely because DHBs aren't creating more positions. Having said that, the non-DHB sector is a growing area of membership. And currently we have about 204 members, and there's scope for further recruitment in that sector. Industrial staff has been actively involved in negotiating non-DHB agreements for 16 other organizations. So that is what our growth rate since 90, 91, 92 looks like. And the last sort of 3 years, the growth has certainly slowed down. That's your team, that's our team. They're absolutely pure gold. They work well beyond the call of duty, and they always manage to do that with a smile on their face. The industrial officers, I call them the road warriors. Their days start early in the morning, catching early flights and catching late flights back home after a long day on the road. And you very seldom hear them complain. The increase in our membership over the years has actually led to an increase in need of support. This increase, we notice, is not due to just the more numbers of members that we have, but it's become disproportional, and it can't be explained just by the addition of more members. There's been a noticeable attitude change in DHBs, with a shift in their approach of management and their human resource departments, and even in those DHBs where we actually previously had fairly good relationships. Initially, it was sort of a little bit like climate change. there was an initial suspicion something is happening, things are starting to heat up here. But after a while, it became very clear that things are actually heating up. And currently, if you talk to our industrial staff, they're fighting fires all the time. We've also noticed that DHB chief executives tend to take on the role of climate change skeptics rather than climate change scientists that looks at the evidence and actually respond accordingly. Some DHBs have actually moved to zero tolerance. In other words, even very small alleged misdemeanors gets racked up fairly quickly, and they're more to incline to formal disciplinary action rather than actually trying to sort it out at the lowest possible level. This has meant that our industrial staff has actually worked a lot harder. Additional travel, additional demands, and most of these things cannot be entirely done and sorted out by telephone or by emails. They need face-to-face interaction. For the members that's actually involved in this process, it's quite often extremely stressful. And they actually require prompt, reliable, and knowledgeable support. There's also what I call the inbox syndrome. That adds a lot of time for all our staff. And add to that text messaging and phone calls, and you can very quickly see how the day can become very full very quickly. Also, shining the spotlight on behavior in the workplace has led to a further increase in activity for our industrial team. And quite often, both the alleged victim as well as the alleged perpetrator are ASMS members, which can be very tricky. The ASMS, we responded to the increase in demand and created an extra positions. And we firstly successfully recruited Steve Hurring and more recently Sarah Dalton. The bigger team also meant we had to sort of restructure the team to keep things as effective as possible. Having said that, we still tend to operate in fighting fires mode and continue to not have much, if any, capacity to be more proactive in our approach and actually get back on the front foot. Programs like Know Your Mecca have actually been very well received. It's very successful, and we would certainly want to continue with that. Further expansion of the industrial workforce is needed for 2016, and Jeff will discuss this a bit more later in formal business. In 2013, the National Executive established the position of Director of Communications, and Kushla was appointed from a very strong field. And communication in its broader sense has actually improved quite dramatically. We have a from-the-ground-up redesigned website that's also mobile-friendly. We now have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and I suspect that our NZMA colleagues would say, well, that is so old school, we've moved on to whatever you guys are doing at the moment. The Specialist, as you know, all our publications have been refreshed and improved, and also includes our gifted name, Toi Matahora. On the research front, we are well aware of the big contribution that Lyndon Keane has made since his appointment. During some national executive discussions, we actually realized that in its professional and policy role, we actually lack independent research or the capacity for more research. This makes it difficult for us to comment, promote, or influence health policy. Further, it was also clear we need more data and information on the state of the medical workforce. And we decided to enhance our ability to measure members' opinions and communicate with ASMS members via electronic surveys and other means. So we created a further research position of a principal analyst, and Lyndon Keane was promoted to Director of Policy and Research. Dr. Charlotte Chamber, or Charlie as she wants to be called, came on board in June 2015 and hit the ground running, and she's actually presenting later today on one of the results of the first surveys. More staff inevitably means more physical office space is required. That's the floor plan of the 11th floor that we're occupying in a central Wellington building. But after the expansion and staff, we actually had to expand that. You'll notice that the top bit, I think it's got a laser, that bit there belonged to a different organization. And we've taken over the whole of the 11th floor. So we've created extra office space, open space here, and a smaller meeting room over there. That's what the entrance of your head office looks like as you come out the elevators. That's the sign on the wall that greets you. And that's what the boardroom looks like, where we meet and where we meet with invited guests as well. Now, the other thing that we revisited in the last couple of years has been clinical leadership. And we've had 2 publications and also a survey on distributive clinical leadership. Now, a great deal of thought, time, and effort went into actually creating these documents, and we certainly hope that they'll bear fruit. And in your packs today, you'll notice there's the formal clinical leadership document. So this is the first time that it's out in the open, and after the conference, we'll obviously socialize it and distribute it and start to discuss it. This document was actually created following quite a wide consultation process, which included selected chief executives, chief medical officers, and academics. And we received actually quite good constructive feedback from them. Our task was then to actually take the original document apart and put it back together again, including all the best bits and feedback we received. And Angela, Julian, Jeff, and myself spent some time actually doing just that. And then finally, Jeff used his considerable writing talent and articulate use of English and done the final editing, and that's the final product in front of you there today. It's a working document. I don't think it'll be elevated to a standpoint or anything, so it's a working document. Read it, use it, and refer to it as required. Sometimes short conversations can actually lead to a chain reaction which can lead to change. Julie Pryor, a clinical lead for medical officers in wider matter, approached me after the 2013 ASMS annual conference, and she proposed that an additional position is established on the national executive to be held by a medical officer to provide a voice and representation for this group within the ASMS so that the executive actually reflects its membership. She came back and reminded me of that conversation after the 2014 ASMS conference, and I placed it on the agenda for the national executive to discuss. And I also had a look at the composition of our membership a little bit more closely. And as I mentioned before, we have also now 200 members in the non-DHB sector. I also looked at how our members are actually geographically distributed across the country and started to ask the question, well, is the current regions or electorates actually still appropriate? We wrote the Constitution 27 years ago. Is it time for us to review that? And the main question is, does the national executive actually represent its members, including small groups and members in smaller DHBs and non-DHB members? So discussions actually, when the exec was talking about it, actually became quite broad at times, but in the end, there was 3 topics that started to emerge. And these was representation on the national executive, the governance of the ASMS, and succession planning. None of us are getting younger. Currently, the current national executive is actually the first executive that actually got a 3-year term. And we decided as a national executive to have an executive-only meeting day off-site so that we can sit down and brainstorm and discuss these sort of things. It was actually a very successful day, and we decided that this is going to become part of the annual executive calendar. So if we actually look at what the regions look like, just a reminder, so Region 1 is basically Auckland and North. Region 2 is sort of the middle belt across the North Island. Region 3 is from Gisborne all the way down to Wellington, and Region 4 is the South Island. So that's our membership distribution. On the left-hand side here, you see that there's the vast majority of our membership sits in Auckland and North. That's another way of representing it. You can also see on the slide back, there's a lot of smaller DHBs with small numbers of members, and they actually face very different challenges in their day-to-day work. You know, where you have a department made up of 2 or 3 doctors, or sometimes solo doctors, like in Gisborne we've got a single ophthalmologist. So their work challenges and covering their work is a lot different from bigger DHBs where you have, you know, departments with 50 or 60 people in it. So regionally, by far Northland and Auckland, Central North Island, Lower North Island, and then Southland non-DHBs. And we also looked at practice type. What does it look like? Who's doing what? So that tells you that there's obviously quite a distribution there as well. So after we had a look at all of these things, we actually came to a decision to establish a short life working party or a subcommittee or whatever you want to call it, consisting out of 2 national executive members and a selection of either branch officers and general members to actually consider whether Section 11 should be changed or whether it's still fine and it serves us well. The other thing we looked at is obviously the governance of the ASMS. And ASMS, the executive is very aware that other organizations has actually found themselves into a degree of strife recently when the governance lines got a bit blurred, and the Royal Australasian College of Physicians and the BMA are 2 recent organizations that struggled with that. So we considered our current governance structure, and I had another look at it, and it's actually fairly clear that the ultimate decision-making authority lies within the membership. So we can, as executive, we can make decisions, but if we want to do any big things, or if there's any controversial things that we need to make a decision on, it's actually back down to the membership to actually decide where we're going to go with it. I sort of tried to, in my own head, try to get a picture of what I think it probably looks like, and there's obviously huge overlap between these groups. So you have general members, you have the annual conference, which is you guys here today, you have the branch officers, and then you have the executive. The executive itself, we actually had a discussion of how do we as executive members contribute to the governance other than our governance role. And we decided to allocate specific roles for different members. So Paul Wilson, he's always done this, and he will continue to do it, looking after finances and helping with the financial side. Murray Barkley and Jeff Hoskins decided data analysis and surveys, and in fact later today we're gonna have a go at some electronic data collection, or not data collection, but electronic voting from the floor, and see if we can get that running up. And Murray and Lauren had a good go at getting that set up. Jeanette McFarlane and Seaton, membership support and industrial support. And then Tim Frendon and Carolyn Fowler, health direction and strategy. We also discussed the role of the national president, and I don't think this will happen in my time, so I'm not sort of building myself a little career here. But the question we asked was, should the president be more visible to the public and the health sector? This could further augment the image we have at the moment. We've got quite a successful profile, and adding a face of a president or clinician would actually be beneficial. But quite a few challenges was identified in achieving this. In such a role, the president will have to be more available in general terms, and obviously will need to be available at short notice for media interviews should that be required. The president will have to stay up to date day by day with both developments in medical politics and DHBs, and have a very close working relationship with the ASMS executive director and the national office staff as well. This will obviously require more time, and the question was, how does the president make time? One suggestion was that FTE is negotiated with the affected DHB, and the DHB is reimbursed by the ASMS to actually provide backfill. This will obviously mean that the president will need to drop some of his or her clinical commitment, and there'll have to be obviously a parachute clause should they want to go back to their previous clinical practice. Additionally, or alternatively, I'll just go back. Additionally, or alternatively, we also thought that setting up a database of members who have a particular interest or specialist knowledge, and that's actually quite willing and keen to speak to the media, can actually add quite a lot as well. Our opinions still carry a lot of weight out there. A good example of this is obviously Eric, that contributed to the public discussion on the TPPA, and he's obviously done some really good work there. So we came to a decision that maybe this is something we need to explore in future, and we'll discuss this during the conference. Succession planning. As I said earlier, none of us are getting any younger, and I will not be standing as president again. By the time this current term is running out, I would have been president for 7 years, and I think it's time for fresh blood and brighter people to take over. We also discussed the succession planning of the actual national executive. You know, do we need to refresh the executive more frequently? Do we need to keep it ticking over? One suggestion was to actually limit the length of the time a member can serve on the national executive. There's obviously some positives for that, but there's also a lot of negatives in doing that. So it's a thought at the moment. Some organizations also have a much more structured vice president becomes immediately past president. Now, if we adopt that sort of structural approach to it, that means somebody is going to be in that role for at least 9 years, which is a reasonable commitment. And if you think you'll probably get onto the executive, then become vice president, then become president, so that's 12 years and out of the way. So something to consider, but it'll be a big ask. So this is our opportunity, I think, to think about change, to think whether we need to change. I'd appreciate your participation and discussion, and obviously speak your mind. Continue to participate and encourage other members to participate on the online surveys. You'll see later today that it's actually very, very useful, and the more people participate, the more easily it is to analyze the data and make actual sense out of it. Communicate with the branch officers and the national executive, and let us know your thoughts and ideas and your concerns. As I've mentioned before, short conversations can actually potentially lead to a big change. So to summarize, we have identified challenges and areas for change to future-proof the ASMS. The current environment we find ourselves in is becoming increasingly toxic. District health boards are getting squeezed from all sides. They have to increase output and throughput with the ever-decreasing budget. The pressure to achieve this is transferred onto us, the workforce, and we need to help the sky from falling on the whole system. The change in attitude by DHBs is not a passing phase or a hiccup, but increasingly toxicity will continue for the foreseeable future. We need to get back on the front foot so we can shape the environment and place the patient in the center of the health system rather than financial balance sheets. Thank you very much.